If you like this video, consider supporting this channel on Patreon, link in the description below.
Kingdom Hearts is a series I love. This is no secret to anyone who's spoken to me for long enough or watched a good handful of videos on this channel. It's beautiful, varied, emotionally striking, and philosophically interesting, all while also just being a fun series of games at the same time. A series like this, with as many games as there are, and with this many years under its belt, is sure to have a large and recognizable cast of characters. Sora, Riku, Roxas, Ventus, Terra, Aqua, Xehanort, a whole gaggle of organization members, and just so many more. It's safe to say Kingdom Hearts is very much more than just Disney cross Final Fantasy, gaining so much traction and popularity that its own original characters are icons in and of themselves. Now, like with any popular series with popular characters, there are sure to be people who misunderstand them and then circulate these misunderstandings around the internet and through fandom spaces until eventually they become repeated by people who don't know any better. We've actually seen this kind of thing with all kinds of different stories, from games to comics to shows and whatnot. There's ones like the misconception that Steven from Steven Universe is a crybaby pacifist that at first started as a meme, but then quickly devolved into bad faith critique of the character from people who had never actually seen the show in the first place, and had only ever seen one terrible video that I won't name outright on the show. Now, this misconception undermines Steven as a greater character and outright ignores moments like him straight up almost murdering White Diamond out of anger. There's others, like the idea that Superman is simply a boring Boy Scout, which completely misses the point of the character and ignores several aspects of his character. But it has also led to a lot of bad takes on him, such as the Injustice series of games, which actively assassinate or go against the character in favor of quote-unquote making him more interesting. What's more, this inclination to misunderstand these characters and besmirch their merit by some groups of fans tends to happen when they are written as upstanding examples of nobility, emotional vulnerability, fragility, and kindness, almost as if embodying these virtues make for inherently bad or uninteresting character exploration. We've seen this kind of reception throughout fan discourse in a variety of storytelling mediums, from comic books to TV shows to video games, etc. Bad takes are everywhere, and Kingdom Hearts is no stranger to receiving bad faith criticism or ignorant takes from those who don't know better. Go on YouTube for 5 seconds and you'll find some rando who only has a passing interest in the series suddenly think they have enough knowledge to talk about the series while also consistently saying stupid or ignorant stuff regarding the games. You have people not understanding actual events and blaming the games for that, even though the games do a very good job of making sure you know everything you're supposed to know, while leaving things you aren't supposed to know hidden, because that's how storytelling works. You have people not understanding certain characters, from people claiming Riku falling for Maleficent is unrealistic in KH1, when it actually makes perfect sense when you take into account the context of him being a 15-year-old boy at the time, and the context of the story itself, to people accusing Sora of being quote-unquote one note because they only see the surface of his character and refuse to look any deeper. But there's one character, more than any other in the series, that I feel is hit with the most bad faith critique and is undoubtedly the most misunderstood character of the entire series: Kairi. The main leading lady of Kingdom Hearts and the third part of the Destiny trio. She's someone who's caught a lot of heat over the years for various reasons, and a lot of said heat and its reasonings, I feel, are either unjustified or come from a place of misunderstanding the character. I would like to take a proper look at this character, one that I feel nobody else has ever truly been willing to do before, and discuss why I believe she is a way better character than her detractors would have you believe. I will go through a couple of points I see passed around consistently and try to tackle each one of these as the video goes on, starting with The idea that Kairi doesn't do enough as a character is a point that I see get tossed around a lot. Now, when a lot of people claim she doesn't do enough as a character, they primarily are referring to her not doing enough fighting. It's a common point thrown around when it comes to women a lot in general, especially women in series with a lot of fighting in them. You see this kind of conversation in fandoms for shonen battle manga all the time, where people look at the leading women of those shows and they complain about them with tired points about them being useless or not doing anything. Now, I'm not here to say these women are untouchable and cannot be critiqued as characters, but often, characters that fall into this category often have their actual characters in writing ignored in favor of complaining about the fact that they don't fight good, such as Sakura Haruno from Naruto or Orihime Inoue from Bleach. Two characters who often get a lot of unnecessary flack from people who don't really understand them as characters, with people usually complaining about them for being useless or not fighting enough. Often the worst of people like this will even accuse writers and creators of being sexist because they don't have these girls throwing down in the Waffle House parking lot like other characters. But I feel that critique, on its own, without proper elaboration, is hollow and reductive. These kind of takes essentially equate a character's worth to their abilities as a fighter, which is... Okay, so I know saying this is gonna make some people stop listening, but I'm asking you, please hear me out. So this mindset of equating a character's worth to fighting capability is exceptionally sexist. A person making a problem of a character, specifically a woman, simply because she doesn't get into as many cool fights as her peers, or claiming that she is useless because she doesn't fight as much as others, demonstrates a dismissiveness to the power of compassion, sincerity, and emotional vulnerability through a feminine lens. And by doing so, whether intentionally or not, is sexist in nature. And no, I'm not saying everyone who dislikes Kairi or Orihime or Sakura or whoever else is sexist. Please stop typing that comment. I see you, Greg. What I am saying is viewing a character's worth solely by their worth as a fighter is a sexist mindset. Not just for the reasons above, but also because it implies a woman's value is only proven when she does something that is often seen as stereotypically masculine, while also criticizing her for having more stereotypically feminine traits. I also think, in Kairi's case, it's a criticism that ignores the character right in front of you because she isn't a completely different character. Like, if you don't like the character, that's whatever, but it's not a fault of the writing that you don't like her. At that point, it's a preference thing, and I can't really change preferences. But I feel it's important for people to remember that a character's value in a narrative should be measured by the impact they leave on its events and characters thematically, narratively, emotionally, and introspectively through the consequences of their actions and personality traits, a fact that is completely removed from their tendency or ability to fight well against others. Now, I've said before in my KH1 video that I felt Kairi wasn't really the best in that game in terms of character. This is still something that I believe, but I feel it's worth noting that there's a reason for that. I.e., she's in a coma for most of that game. She's doing a really good Vanessa Afton at the end of the FNAF movie impression for like 90% of the game, so I feel faulting her entire character over that is a bit unfair. And in spite of this fact, Kairi is still a super important element in KH1's story. She is the driving force for that game's plot in several ways, acting as the motivation for both our main protagonist Sora and his rival in this title, Riku. This plot, fundamentally, would be very different without her in it. This was another thing I alluded to in my KH1 video when I called her a very important character. And even if someone wanted to argue that this doesn't matter, as it's not a direct action from her, I'd counter by arguing that Kairi does actually have some direct actions within KH1's plot, which is impressive for a character who sleeps through most of it. After Sora pulls a Dante and stabs himself with the Keyblade of Hearts to free Kairi's heart, Kairi makes a run for it with Donald and Goofy, with a Shadow Heartless Sora following behind. When they finally meet back up, Donald tries to fight Sora, not realizing who he is behind those vacant yellow glowing eyes, but Kairi does. Heartless swarm them all, and in a moment of desperation, Kairi embraces Sora's Heartless to protect him, like he protected her. The first of many examples of Kairi sharing Sora's desire to protect the people she loves. It's this act of love, this act of selflessness, this act of bravery that pulls Sora's heart out of the darkness and brings him back. After escaping and retreating to Traverse Town, Kairi has this scene with Sora that most people only remember for the part where she gives him the lucky charm, but they kind of often forget the whole rest of the conversation. The parts like Sora mentioning how funny it is to him that he spent all this time looking for her when she was with him all along, They also forget an important moment with Kairi, where she asks Sora if he thinks it'll ever be the same between the three of them since Riku's lost his heart. A sentence Sora doesn't even let her finish, as he then tells her about how she saved him from being a Heartless. He explains what it felt like, floating through the void of darkness as he slowly lost himself piece by piece. But it was her voice calling out to him that brought him back. Funnily enough, this bit is kind of foreshadowed by Cloud and Olympus when he tells Sora to never lose sight of his life, which is an example of how the Final Fantasy characters are more than just fan service, but that's not the subject of today's video, so I won't get caught up on that tangent. Kairi's reasoning, from her own mouth, is,
I didn't want to just forget about you, Sora. I couldn't.
This act of Kairi's gives Sora the realization he needs in this moment. Their hearts are connected, and that connection is what saved him. This makes him realize the belief that no matter how great the darkness, a light shines within. I hope the reason I explained all that has become clear to you, but in case it hasn't, Kairi's direct action helps Sora realize something important. It's her actions that not only save him directly, like he saved her, but also help him realize just how strong the light truly is. Even back in KH1, Kairi was still actually doing things and not just sitting around passively like her detractors often claim. Because it was Kairi's actions, her direct actions, that led to Sora realizing just how strong the light truly is, and gave him the hope needed to believe he could still save Riku. Because, after all, if Kairi could save him from darkness, then he could absolutely do the same for Riku. Kairi is absolutely fucking important to the plot of KH1, and without her, Sora would still be a little imp Shadow Heartless, and Riku would still be a meat puppet for Billy Zane over there. Now I can already see some people trying to argue how these actions of Kairi's weren't done with certainty, and they could argue these actions are, in a way, not truly active. But I feel like that's an ignorant and closed-minded way to view things. Kairi's actions in both Hollow Bastion and Traverse Town tie back to her core traits, those being bountiful compassion, strength of will, emotional intelligence, and how each of these is responsible for allowing Kairi to perform actions in the narrative that are exclusive to her and her alone. Kairi's emotional intelligence, while not perfect, is clearly there and presented to you from very early on. She's the one who notices how much Riku is changing the closer they get to the day they leave, even though she isn't able to perfectly articulate what those changes even are in the moment. This is also why, in my opinion, she was able to so easily recognize Riku underneath the body of Ansem, Seeker of Darkness in KH2, because she's that in tune with her own emotions. Also, interesting note, Kairi realizing the guy who looks like Ansem in KH2 is actually Riku is a neat way to parallel her realizing the tiny Shadow Heartless following her and Sora's dad's around was actually Sora himself. This is all to say that if a character's active choices are made compelling and meaningful by how their core traits lead to them intuitively solving problems and achieving goals through agency, then Kairi's higher emotional intelligence, as established earlier in KH1 and elaborated on as the series progresses, allows her to intuitively recognize Sora in his shadow form during the incident in Hollow Bastion. That intuition leads to an active, courageous choice from her, fueled by compassion to protect Sora by means of shielding him with her body without any hesitation. In doing so, her light is able to manifest itself, breaking Sora free of his shadow form, and even dispels the other Heartless away from her, which shows her strength of will. And in the KH2 parallel scene with Riku, it's her taking the first step forward to speak up and stop her friends from possibly never reuniting. Another active choice on her part, very deliberate in fact. She shouts for Riku not to go, which stops him, and tells Keyblade Hero 3 who this man truly is. Speaking of KH2, KH2 onward strengthens my resolve regarding my beliefs about Kairi and her habit of throwing herself into danger. In that game specifically, Kairi does a lot more than people often notice, actually. Like how when faced with Axel and a portal to the unknown darkness, she rushes through the portal to an unknown destination fearlessly. It even throws out a nice smartass remark towards emo Godzilla Mendoza before doing so. This is because there are more ways for a character to be cool than just being an expert fighter, and that can be shown in other ways. The fact Axel's trying the whole cool and smarmy approach, and it's upended by Kairi just clapping back as she runs off into the unknown darkness, is pretty damn cool if you ask me. There's also the aspect of this scene where, before Axel made himself known, she vocalized her doubts that waiting is good enough. She's clearly frustrated with how passive her role is currently, and she wants to do more. She's tired of just waiting for her friends to come home and wants to do something, but has no clue what. So, when the opportunity shows itself to her, she leaps for it. Another example from the same game, but later on, is when she flings herself off a second-story balcony in an effort to save Sora despite not having a Keyblade at that point. There she goes, once again, throwing herself into danger recklessly to save Sora. A lot of Kairi's actions connect back to those around her, specifically Sora and Riku, and it's clear there's an underlying fear she has of losing the people around her. This attitude of throwing herself into danger also isn't out of nowhere. I bring this up because she repeats this behavior in KH3, which is a game I think does a lot to try and shine an even brighter spotlight on this behavior of hers than before. And yet, somehow, I don't know how, but somehow, people missed it here more than any other game. In KH3, Kairi insists on being there for the big final battle. Like she says,
"Let me keep you safe,"
in response to Sora saying,
"Kairi, I'll keep you safe."
And she says this because she's desperate to give back. It's clear she's tired of constantly being protected and being saved, not just by Sora, but also Riku and everyone else. She wants to prove herself, and she wants to catch up to everyone else. A lot of people complained about Kairi in 3 specifically, because they feel she didn't do enough in the final battle. But I feel it's worth reminding people, she is undoubtedly the weakest of the 7 Guardians of Light in terms of strength and combat. Aqua, Ventus, and Terra are trained warriors who literally have had proper training for most, if not their entire lives. They're traditionally trained fighters, and it shows in their fighting styles. We also know King Mickey had training under Master Yen Sid, and he's the oldest person of the 7. So he's also got the advantage of experience helping him out as well as formal training. Axel/Lee was in the organization. We know from Days that the workload of someone in that group isn't exactly light. It's safe to assume he did a lot of on-the-job training fighting-wise. Sora and Riku did, well, a lot of on-the-fly training during their adventures, having experiences through KH1, Chain of Memories, KH2, and Dream Drop Distance under their belts, so they're no strangers to combat. Plus, Sora has all the new experience he picked up during the events of KH3 before the climax to put on top of all that. But Kairi was training with Lee, I hear someone cry without thinking, in which I respond, yeah, which was nowhere near enough training by comparison to any of these. If Kairi had become on par with Sora and Riku in terms of power and skill after just a few days of training, that'd be a massive letdown for her character. And I also know for a fact the same people who complain about how she was handled in KH3 currently would be complaining about how she's too good at everything now. What a Mary Sue! Kairi actually failing once again in KH3 is, in my opinion, very important to her overall arc and just good writing. Remember that scene in KH2, the balcony one that I mentioned earlier? Yeah, she quickly got surrounded before she could even actually reach Sora, and it was only with Riku's help that she didn't die due to her recklessness. You know what that is? You know what that is? That's called having flaws, and compelling flaws at that. Flaws that are shown through her actions within the plot, and flaws that are kept consistent with how KH3 unfolds as well. Hell, it's consistent with her characterization in KH1, which is something I'll elaborate on in the next segment. The point here is I think it's a bit unfair and dishonest to act like Kairi doesn't do anything in the stories of these games. And for the people going, oh, but she should do more, I want to ask, do you ask the same of men like Axel, who has had as much of a rich and interesting character as Kairi, but is basically a jobber for 90% of this series? Axel, before he took off in popularity, was essentially just fucking around and finding out for like all of Chain of Memories. But Axel was so loved by fans for his personality and character that he stuck around after KH2, got developed, and became one of the 7 Guardians of Light by KH3. And before someone tries to act like Kairi isn't fleshed out, let me finish the video first, please. Kairi does plenty within the overall story of the series. The only reason people don't notice is often what she does doesn't involve a cool or flashy fight scene, so it doesn't count in the minds of some people, or it gets missed by those not paying that much attention to the overall narrative. She's a driving force for this series. She is crucial to the development of various characters, including our other 2 main protagonists, and has had several examples of her doing direct things that actually affect the course of the plot, which leads to my next point. This claim, and claims similar to it, are just flat out wrong. I'm not even sorry for saying that one because I'm right. You're wrong. Kairi is not submissive, as she's constantly insisting she be a part of the action, and often the only reasons why she isn't is due to circumstance, such as her heart being literally out of her body in KH1, or getting separated during the climax of KH2. That scene in KH1 in Traverse Town, where Sora says out loud that Kairi's direct actions saved his life and brought him back from the depths of darkness, also has Kairi immediately respond to Sora's speech of realization with an immediate,
Well, let's go.
and it's Sora that protests. He tells her she can't go, and when she demands an answer, and I mean she demands it, she sounds so annoyed when she says why not.
You can't go.
Why not?
Sora says it's because it's way too dangerous. She argues this point, saying the only reason they made it this far was because they stuck together. Sora does respond by saying even if they're apart, they're not alone. And even with that, she questions with a,
I can't help?
and Sora responds with a,
You'd kind of be in my way.
At that point, Kairi relents on arguing, but she insists that Sora take her lucky charm, almost as like a compromise. I detail the scene because it's kind of the start of several things for Kairi. One, it's the first example of her trying desperately to be a part of the action. And two, it shows how afraid Sora is of Kairi getting hurt. He's so afraid of that, he doesn't want to even put her in any position that could potentially risk her life. And both of these things come back in KH3 in different ways. Even though she stopped arguing with him on this one, she didn't really take the message of she shouldn't do dangerous things recklessly, as we come to see in later titles, and she still symbolically forces herself with Sora with the lucky charm, making him promise he'll bring it back to her as sort of a safeguard, or at least to give her peace of mind. She clearly equates him having the lucky charm to her being with him. Not only is it shaped like a star, much like the Palpu fruit, but when she says the line, "I'm always with you," her eyes look down, most likely at the lucky charm. And that charm's importance doesn't come from nowhere. Remember, she was making this thing while she, Sora, and Riku were prepping the raft for their journey. She was making it to bring them luck. But remember, the charm is a wayfinder, and its design calls to mind a Palpu fruit, i.e. a thing that we know is meant to bond the hearts of people who share one. To me, it's clear Kairi never wants to lose her bond with Sora and Riku. There's a reason she asks if Sora thinks it'll ever be the same between them after all this. There's a reason she made a Wayfinder as a lucky charm for their journey. And there's a reason she now insists that Sora take the same lucky charm with him now if she isn't allowed to go with him. She wants to be an active part of her friends' lives. She wants to be there right with them, but she isn't being allowed to in this moment. And so she finds a compromise in giving Sora the charm and making him promise to bring it back to her. Now cut to KH3. And she's the one to hand Sora the Palpu fruit, an action that catches Sora off guard at first. In this scene, she vocally acknowledges that the upcoming battle will be their toughest yet. Because of the risk, she takes the first step and shares the Palpu fruit with Sora because she wants to always be with Sora, always be a part of his life, no matter what. A desire of hers we know has been there since the first game. A desire of hers that's shared with Sora. However, it's Kairi that takes initiative here, which is not unusual for her. She did a similar thing at KH2 when her and Sora reunited in that game. He stood there, and before he could even apologize, she embraced him in a hug. She's always been the one to take the initiative in their relationship. From saying she and Sora should run away together at the start of KH1, to her being the one to say let's go before Sora even gets the chance to the hug in KH2, to reaching her hand out to him at the end of the FMV in KH2, to her offering him the Palpu fruit in KH3. All of these are examples of Kairi being quite the opposite of passive. I think it's interesting how Axel's words,
If you have a dream, don't wait, act,
perfectly reflect Kairi's own attitude. The idea that Kairi is a passive character in the entire series is just actively ignoring her actual personality and ignoring the text that's right in front of you. Whenever she's not involved in the action, it's either due to outside circumstances, her own physical weakness causing her to need to be saved, which is something we know she doesn't like, by the way, or because she's straight up just not in the game in question, because she's not even in every single game. Kairi's story is one of vulnerability, recklessness, and a love so strong she's willing to risk it all for those she cares about. All traits she, interestingly, parallels with Sora and even Riku. The only difference is a contrast in power. but she's just as willing as either of them, and has shown time and time again she's willing to throw herself in danger without even thinking. But it's also a story of a woman who constantly wants to do more, and despite her best efforts, is often given pushback by the world. It's a genuine struggle, but one she never truly gives into. One she's always fighting against, and she's always trying to do what she wants, even if it's not always the way she wants, or things don't always go as planned. Now in KH3 Remind, we actually get a playable Kairi for the first time, and she even fights Armored Xehanort alongside Sora. During this bit, one of her attack lines is,
Please work!
which is something I mentioned in my KH2 video, by the way. This is, if you ask me, a deliberate reference to Kairi's insecurities and lack of confidence in her abilities. Now, some may ask how she can have a lack of confidence when she's constantly throwing herself into danger, and always itching to fight either alongside or for her friends. Well, the thing is, she chooses to fight in spite of those insecurities and fears, because that's what bravery is. Her countering Sora's "let me keep you safe" is her insisting that she can protect him like he protects her. Her going, "I can do this," before you get the chance to select her in that Remind section, where you can play as her, is her trying to psych herself up because she needs to psych herself up. In Melody of Memory, Kairi fights Xehanort, and she is fucking pissed. I should note, it's a memory of Xehanort, and not the real Xehanort, who is still very much doing his best Ace from One Piece impression by being dead. Anyway, she blames him for everything that's happened, and blinded by that rage, throws herself into the fight, and surprise, surprise, actually kind of holds her own pretty decently. Although eventually Xehanort does overtake her, and Sora, from far away, has to come in and save her once again. By the end of Melody of Memory, after all of this, Riku and Kairi are given a gateway to Sora, supposedly, by Fairy Godmother, and the name of the star. Fairy Godmother, in this scene, says the rest is up to Riku. But before he can go, Kairi says she wants to go too. Riku immediately goes to tell her that's a bad idea, but stops when he notices her reaction. She lets out a gasp. She has a look of disappointment that washes over her, before that then turns into acceptance, because once again, she's given even more proof that she's weaker than her friends. The series has made it clear for over 20 years that if Kairi's anything, it's not submissive. She's constantly trying to do things for herself and give back to those who give to her. But she's not super successful at it, which overall, I think is just way more interesting than if she was just super good at everything all of the time. Sora and Riku aren't even super good at everything, with both having plenty of moments of weakness just like Kairi. The only difference is that they've had more chances to get stronger, and thus have sailed ahead of her in terms of that. No, it isn't. It really isn't. Kairi isn't stagnant or flat or whatever other word you want to use. Her character has been evolving over the entire series. In KH1, we see Kairi has anxieties about losing Sora and Riku, her found family essentially, and those fears manifest in concerns about change and being separated from them. This evolves into a firmer determination to bring her friends back home and reunite them in KH2, which leads to her constantly throwing herself into the unknown and the dangerous in an effort to do exactly that. Then we see in KH3 with the Paupu Fruit scene, Kairi actively choosing to change the status quo of her relationship with Sora, which, among other things, is an extension of that growing determination from KH2. She wants to keep her friends together, and now that they are, she wants to do what she can to keep them that way. And that leads to Melody of Memory, the culmination of everything that the series has built up with Kairi's character up until that point. Specifically, its ending, which is like immediate proof that Kairi is developing and growing, because that look of disappointment that washes over her shifts to one of somber realization. She knows her going with Riku is a bad idea. It'd just be her throwing herself into another dangerous situation recklessly without thinking. She admits outright she wants to go with him, but she knows that she can't, making a clear distinction between what she wants and what she knows she needs to do. What she wants is to save Sora, to give back to him, but she needs to stay behind so she can get stronger so that she can actually fight alongside Riku and Sora as an equal. She even says as much.
I want to go.
Kairi, that's not...
Yeah, I know. I want to go with you. But I know that I can't. I need to finish training. I need to become stronger. And when I do, I'll be right there next to you and Sora.
The following scene after this is in Yinsid's tower. Kairi makes the vocal decision to train under Master Aqua. She wants to put in a real effort to get stronger, to be better, and to grow as a Keyblade wielder so that she can do the things she wants to do. Before, she was essentially punching a brick wall over and over again, constantly fighting enemies stronger than her, and paying for it by putting herself in more danger, causing problems for herself and those around her, those that she cares about. But now, she wants to take her time to learn, so that she can hone her skills, get stronger, and break down the wall once and for all. It's the start of a new arc for Kairi, something that will undoubtedly lead to more for her character going forward. Melody of Memory is essentially for Kairi what Chain of Memories was for Riku, which is funny when you realize that both games came out on November 11th of their respective years, i.e. 2004 and 2020 respectively. Some could question why it took this long for Kairi to reach this step of her arc, but you need to remember the story's time context. Kairi was 14 in KH1. She's only 16 in Melody of Memory. KH2 and KH3 happen in the same year, so it's not unreasonable for her to have not learned this lesson by KH3 itself. Hell, I'd argue this progression is more natural and realistic than if she had learned this between 2 and 3. And yes, she was training already, but it wasn't like proper training. At least that's how Yinsid makes it seem with his question in Melody of Memory. I say this because I've seen this counter before, that it's taken too long for Kairi to get to this point, when actually it hasn't, as long as you think about it from her perspective, rather than thinking about it from your perspective. I mean, I understand KH2 came out when your parents loved each other, and KH3 came out after they got divorced, but reminder, the same amount of time hasn't passed in the story of the games that has passed in the real world. She does. I literally spent about 14 pages of a script detailing her character and how it's been shown throughout the series. I've already argued this point. I mean, I could just repeat all of my previous points where I illustrate various moments where she's provided to the plot while also attempting to paint a clear picture of her own character motivations and whatnot, but that'd be me just talking in circles. So instead, I'm going to talk about why I don't like this point and points like it. As I mentioned earlier, I believe a lot of the bad faith criticism against Kairi comes from this idea that a character's worth is entirely dictated by if they're a competent fighter. And I also believe that this line of thinking is sexist, or at the very least, seeped in sexist mindsets and ideologies. But there is a second thing, that being the idea of accusing a character like Kairi, or characters in similar positions to Kairi, as say, Lucy from Fairy Tail, or the previously mentioned Sakura from Naruto, or Hime from Bleach, as having no character, despite there being examples in their text of them expressing specific personality traits, opinions, responses, and emotions in ways that are uniquely them, which is the most base definition of having a character. To claim Kairi lacks a character when there's plenty of examples in the text itself to the contrary, including in the games most people have played, such as KH2 and KH3, and even KH1, where she has very little active screen time compared to her immediate friends Sora and Riku. It's just not a valid take if you ask me, because it's actively ignoring the character that's right in front of you, and the story right in front of you. If you simply just don't like the character on offer, I mean, that's one thing, but not something I can really argue because, as I said earlier, that becomes a matter of opinion, and that opinion is subjective. I would disagree with you if you do dislike her character, but that's not the issue I'm arguing. I don't care if you don't like a character that I like. The issue that I'm arguing is when people decide that since they don't like a character, that means there's something wrong with how that character is written. So they make accusations and claims about the character to justify their opinion when what they're saying is simply not the case. You get people claiming that Kairi is one note, that she isn't a good character, that she has no personality, and that she isn't good when compared to the other girls in the series, and all of those takes just come off to me like people just not paying attention to what's right in front of them. And this isn't a problem with casuals or whatever. People who only have a vague interest in the series who often say incorrect or ignorant things regarding these games. People who consider themselves big KH fans fall into this trap too when it comes to Kairi. And she's not the only character these types of fans have a tendency to misunderstand, as they also make similar one-note claims about Sora, which are also just wrong as far as I'm concerned. To make an example, saying Kairi has no character and is just there to be the girl TM would be like claiming Bullfrog from Captain Laserhawk is just there to make silly faces and be a goofy animal mascot. Both are takes that ignore the character's actions within the story, as well as their purpose within it, ignoring how important they are to what goes on, and everything that they do across their respective series. Some might argue that my definition of what it would take to truly have no character is too literal. That obviously people don't mean she has 100% no character whatsoever and whatnot. And to that, I want to present an example of a character that I believe lacks any proper defining character. Bella Swan from Twilight. A character who was basically designed to be as much of a blank slate as possible for the reader to project onto.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
But what it does mean for Bella as a character is she really doesn't have many defining traits as a character. There's nothing that I could describe about her that makes me immediately think, oh yeah, that's a total Bella Swan vibe, or Bella Swan moment, or anything to that effect, because she lacks a properly defined character across the books and films. Now, I do acknowledge that Bella isn't a literal blank slate, as she has character traits such as being antisocial and her awkward personality. One could even say that a lot of this is a side effect of her parents' divorce and moving locations from the familiar to a new setting. There's even an argument to be made that I'm just not giving Bella or the story of Twilight enough credit with this analogy. Someone could even spin the narrative that she's just as worthwhile a character as I'm claiming Kairi is. So then the question becomes, well, what's the difference? What makes me go to bat for Kairi so strongly, but not Bella? The difference is simply in execution. Kairi's specific traits, the things that make up who she is as a character, are consistently emphasized, challenged, and re-examined through actions across the series, as opposed to Bella, who would often find herself simply stumbling from conflict to conflict with no real interest in examining her greater character in any meaningful way. Kairi's internal conflict throughout the series is placed at the forefront of her actions, and each game she's in takes the time to progress her mindset and growth in some way. Meanwhile, Bella is just a special girl who happens to be important without taking the time to be introspective about her personality on a greater means. Twilight fails to set up character moments for Bella and pay them off in a way that is congruent with her flaws. Mostly because Bella is not put in a position where she must address her flaws, which is an issue that could be chalked up to her main purpose as a character being for the reader to self-insert themselves on. Bella's flaws are presented as an excuse for her to deserve being pined for and granted special pleading by other characters. Meanwhile, Kairi's hurdles are presented as consequences of the struggles she must face. That's the core difference. Kairi is a character whose character is given attention and thought when considering how her story unfolds. There's plenty I could say about her. Things to take away from her place in the story of Kingdom Hearts. What she's done, how she's acted and reacted, various things like that which create a defined character in my mind that is Kairi. I could talk about her similarities with Axel, how both struggle with anxieties regarding the loss of their found families, thus making his "don't wait, act" quote that I mentioned earlier even more interesting, and shows that pairing her up with him in KH3 was a pretty intentional choice with a point behind it. Axel, like Kairi, doesn't want to lose his found family, and like Kairi, actively seeks to reclaim what he's lost when separated from them. In KH2, he wants Roxas back in a similar way to how Kairi wants Sora and Riku back. Axel also obviously wants Xion back too, but he doesn't know that consciously during KH2, as you know. Which in turn adds a new layer to their budding friendship post Axel becoming Lee again, and what we do see of them together during the events of KH3. Another thing I could talk about is Kairi's psychology, about how a lot of her anxieties and concerns are highlighted exceptionally early on during the Destiny Islands portion of KH1, how those fears have a tendency to affect how she thinks, and even her choices at points. How even small things like battle voice lines during her playable segment in Remind were taken into consideration when it came to showing her character and the deeper aspects of who she is that's often ignored by a good percentage of people. I could even go into how her origins from Radiant Garden and how she was essentially whisked away from that. She doesn't even properly remember her time before arriving on Destiny Islands, something she says early into KH1's runtime. There's already an existing knowledge that she's lost something, and with that, it makes sense that she's terrified of losing everything she has now in the same way. A fear of forgetting, a fear of losing, a strong determination to avoid that from happening, which makes losing Sora at the end of KH3 all the more heart-shattering for her, which, of course, leads to her unmatched rage towards Xehanort in Melody of Memory. Imagine how lonely and confused Kairi must have felt when she first appeared at Destiny Islands. No concrete idea of where she had come from or how she got there, nor any family with her to call her own. Being able to grow up with Sora and Riku gave her a family, essentially. People she could call her own, in a way. And it makes sense that anything that would threaten that family would bring forth these feelings of anxiety, of loneliness, and would motivate her to do whatever she could to save them, often without considering her own safety or well-being. There is a lot going on here that people often either overlook or just flat out refuse to see. And the thing is, I kind of get where some of Kairi's critics are coming from, even if I think they're misguided and I just plain don't agree with them. These people want to see Kairi do more than she already has. They want to see the character excel in ways she hasn't yet. And they want a spotlight to be put on this character because they do genuinely like her, because not every critic for Kairi is someone who hates her. But if your quote-unquote solution to Kairi is to completely change her character, make her more of a generic action girl, and remove core aspects of who she is to quote-unquote improve her, then you just have to take a step back, take your mask off, and admit to yourself that you just do not like this character. And maybe, just maybe, analyze internally why you believe that a woman is only a good character when she's doing action stuff, and why you're unable to appreciate other types of character traits. The idea that traditional femininity equates to a lack of character is how we got stuck in that 2010s era of character writing, where a lot of women in popular mainstream media were all cut from the Joss Whedon cloth of snarky action girls who are just so cool and all that. The kind of thing that led to characters like Wendy from Gravity Falls, a character I feel that show let down by never allowing to be a real character outside of being the cool older girl that Dipper liked. Ironically, Wendy is a character I'd say is more deserving of claims of having no real character, not Kairi. But a lot of people miss that because Kairi is the more traditionally feminine one of the two. And a lot of society inherently assumes that femininity is equivalent to weakness, which is very much a bad and sexist mindset to have. And if you don't believe me when I say this bias is very much a thing, where people will bash the hell out of a character with traditionally feminine traits, no matter how well written they are, but give free passes and praise to even the most one-note of characters who are traditionally masculine, then look no further than... Yozora is the super boss from Kingdom Hearts 3 Remind. He is also the protagonist of the fictional video game Vernium Rex, within the toy box world of KS3's main story. He is a character with mismatched eye colors, dressed in black and red, who wields a glowing sword and a crossbow at the same time, like a fusion between Noctis from Final Fantasy XV, Daryl Dixon from The Walking Dead, and Shadow the fucking Hedgehog, with elements of Riku in his design as well, to create what looks to be, on the surface, one of the coolest motherfuckers to ever fuck around. He showed up in the main story briefly to serve as a typical RPG protagonist for Vernium Rex, a game that the character Rex is really into when our heroes arrive in Toy Box. So much to the point that Rex mistakes our heroes for the heroes of said game. It's a cute idea for the story and allows for there to be a believable reason as to why Buzz doesn't immediately buy Sora's story alongside his own past experience. In Remind, we're shown that Yozora is a real person to some degree. It even says some mysterious things about a voice guiding him and how he must save Sora. Obviously, setting up some big plot stuff for further down the line. This also leads to a very difficult boss fight where Yozora will absolutely clown on the average player, and you can even get an alternate ending where Sora does lose this fight. To make matters worse, if you defeat Yozora but you have your Kupo coin equipped, then he'll just steal it and use it for himself. He is very much a cool character on the surface. He's dressed in black and red, the definition of badass in terms of color combination, and looks like the character to center an entire Bring Me the Horizon 1x1 crossed with Linkin Park's Papercut AMV around. But that's all we know about him right now! Like, genuinely, that's where he becomes relevant for this discussion. Yozora has nothing as far as an actual character goes at this moment. Everything that I could say about what we know about him as of where we are now with Melody of Memory's ending and Remind's additional content to KH3 is all surface level traits. He's got a cool voice. So do half the men in Kingdom Hearts to begin with. He's got a cool design. So does everyone in Kingdom Hearts. He's a brooding and mysterious man with an edgy appearance. Not exactly a rare trait to have on its own, not gonna lie. The only real thing we know is Yozora has some connection to the nameless star. But we don't know much regarding that relationship either. The most we know about Yozora is he's cool and he's powerful, and that's it. And yet somehow, Yozora has become a fairly popular character already, with even well-known KH content creators like HMK putting him as his second favorite character in the series, when he has like maybe 3 minutes of screen time that isn't him kicking your ass over and over again in a boss fight. Right now, Yozora is to Kingdom Hearts what Boba Fett was to Star Wars. A cool character with a badass design, but with almost no actual screen time, and yet a massive following that seems so strange when you consider how little content of him exists. And before you get it twisted, I don't hate Yozora. I like him too, honestly. But I like the idea of Yozora and the potential he has in regards to where his character could eventually go, and what he could eventually bring to the table regarding the next saga. But right now, he's not really a character. He's at most an idea. And at least, he's just a guy that looks cool. But notice how everything we do know about Yozora is that he's a brooding, mysterious, cool guy who fights really good and does flashy and stylish attacks in his boss fight. He summons giant robots, and he can steal the Keyblade from the player. And it's so cool and edgy looking that there's a mod on PC that replaces his boss theme with a song from DMC Devil May Cry, the 2013 reboot game that a lot of people make jokes about because it's too edgy, even though it's actually not a bad game and the music's actually pretty fucking badass too, but that's not the point. But in terms of character, he's got nothing right now. And this isn't a criticism of the character himself, because it's obvious the intent is to hide basically everything about this man right now. Similar to Lingering Will in KH2FM, and how he existed as a mysterious super boss with a cool design and ominous dialogue that was meant to hint at details that would be revealed to us in a later title. What I am criticizing is how, somehow, Yozora can get all of this praise from many people for doing almost nothing as a character. Meanwhile, Kairi is constantly made fun of, dragged, and given bad faith critique, but she has way more character than this man. And this goes back to what I had been saying earlier. A lot of people have this nasty habit of equating fighting good with good character. And it becomes this thing where they think that if a character isn't constantly doing flashy super moves and slamming skulls, then they aren't good characters. It's the same mindset that leads to people incorrectly assuming that Disney princesses as a whole lack character, despite characters like Jasmine and Ariel having pretty defined characters within their narratives. Which is funny, because Kairi is also a Disney princess, so hey, I guess some things never change. Point is, there is something to be said about how a lot of people within society have a habit of equating traditionally masculine traits as worth more than traditionally feminine traits. Writing a woman in fiction well doesn't mean write her like a man. It means taking the time to write her as a character, and that can be done in more than one way. It can be done in a way where you write a traditionally feminine character who's not a fighter, is soft, is caring, is compassionate, sincere, and vulnerable. You don't have to overcorrect and make every girl a wisecracking action hero in some attempt to gain validation from people who refuse to see the value in women who aren't like them, because women don't have to justify themselves. Hell, this extends past just sexism. In general, there seems to be a tendency for sensitive and humanistic traits to be underappreciated by certain people in favor for ones that are coded as more badass and stoic, regardless of gender. There's a reason that a lot of people who don't really look into deeper character stuff often write off Superman as a boring character, and they act like Batman is just defaultly better because Batman is the more outwardly stoic and badass of the two. And yes, what I'm saying goes the other way around too. There are ways to write a woman where the woman in question is an excellent fighter, someone who has many traits people could stereotypically claim as masculine. And this can be done without removing her identity as a woman, because womanhood isn't defined by traditional femininity or masculinity. One's identity isn't set in a strict binary. It's not black or white. It's not good or bad. There isn't one right way to write a woman. Adam Eve, Laura Croft, Nami, Shoka Sakurane, An Takamaki, Lucina Kushinada, Heather Mason, Samus Aran, and Kairi are all women in fiction who are pretty different in terms of how they're presented, who they are, how they express themselves, and what they achieve within their own stories. but are all what I would consider good characters that are written well. But for some reason, women like Kairi are criticized more harshly than, say, someone like Aqua from the same series, because Aqua fights and thus has proven her worth to the kinds of people I'm criticizing right now. Hell, Aqua isn't even safe, since some people were upset about how she was handled in KH3 because she was, let me check my notes here, lost to Vanitas due to prioritizing protecting her cherished friend over beating the emo has-been hotel-loving twink's ass, and also got swallowed up by a giant heartless storm. And yet these people somehow act like this game didn't do her justice, despite aspects like the anti-Aqua plot point building on the trauma we saw being explored in Fragmentary Passage. But now I'm getting on a tangent about a completely different character. Back on track. It's strange to me that men like Yuzora can get away with doing basically nothing other than being cool and get showered with praise and love almost immediately. Meanwhile, a woman like Kairi, someone who's shown her character time and time again, been there for those she loves, and has risked her own life despite her lack of power, is treated like crap simply because she isn't some epic cool McFighter guy. Kairi deserves better. And I don't mean from the games. I mean from the audience. Because tell me, why does Yuzora get so much love when he's not even really a character right now? Yet Kairi is constantly called one note and is claimed to lack a character, despite plenty of evidence to the contrary. One could argue that what got people to fall in love with Yuzora is the mystery and the intrigue regarding who he is, where he comes from, and everything we don't know about him. But then that returns back to my point. We don't know Yuzora as a character. We don't know if he's an interesting character underneath that surface, underneath that potential. The Nameless Star, weirdly enough, has more character that we know of than Yuzora, since we've actually had a couple scenes of her talking to not only Sora, but Kairi and Riku, so we couldn't actually glean a little about her from that. Whereas Yuzora really only has one conversation with Sora before they fight, and that's mostly mystery talk that sounds cool and ominous. And again, I find Yuzora's mystery compelling too. Do not get me wrong, but him being a compelling mystery is not the same as him being a compelling character. And that difference is paramount to me. Going back to my Lingering Will comparison to Yuzora, Lingering Will by itself is a great mystery, but not a very deep character due to how little we know about him. But when you have the context of Terra, his story, and who he is, suddenly Lingering Will becomes a better character in hindsight because he's an extension of Terra's greater character. So most likely, in the future, with the gift of hindsight, we'll be able to look back on Yuzora's first appearances and reflect on them with the knowledge of his greater character. And I, for one, am looking so forward to that. I want to learn more about this guy, but we're not there yet. And I find it very strange how people are so willing to fawn over Yuzora, some even claiming him to be one of their favorite KH characters, period, somehow, but often in the same breath will try to undermine and underplay Kairi when she's the character with more, well, with more character. In conclusion, I hope this video has done what I've set out for it to do. To show you, the audience, Kairi from another perspective, and to do right by this character that I feel has been dragged through the dirt for years by a large crowd of people who I feel just didn't get her, as well as putting a spotlight on a larger issue that I feel affects more than just the discussion regarding this character, but women in general. People are so dismissive of this character despite all she's done. There's aspects of her character that I feel are honestly pretty relatable, and I'm sure other women besides me see parts of themselves in her as well. And I hope I also gave some validation to the people who, like me, actually enjoy this character, and don't brush her off simply because she isn't boxing as often as other characters. I'm not sure how far this video's reach will be. Not very far if my other videos are anything to go off of, but I wanted to put this out there and say something I hadn't really seen anyone else really say. I constantly see people make negative posts about Kairi, unfairly criticizing her for not being someone she isn't, and it's just bothered me for the longest time. Will I change everyone's minds? No, probably not. But if you made it this far, then you at least heard me out, and I appreciate that. And maybe, just maybe, this video made you rethink how you thought about not just Kairi, but about character writing in general. And maybe it made you realize some biases you didn't even realize you had. I'm excited to see the next chapter in Kairi's story because if Melody of Memory is anything to go off of, Seems we're gearing up for some real exciting stuff for her. And as a fan of this character, who loves her so dearly, who finds so much comfort in her, I'm personally very excited. And now, with all of that said,
have I proven my point?